distinction between derivatives and credit default swaps. Is it all the same?
A credit default swap is a derivative.
That's what I was going to say. It is a derivative.
Yeah. Derivative is simply a product that is not what we would make a distinction between cash products and derivative products. So a cash product is like a bond, loan, or stock, or a treasury bond, or a T-bill. It's a product that requires you to up 100% of the cash on day one, and then you get product in your hand. That's a cash product. A derivative product is generally a product which doesn't require you to put up 100% of the cash on day one.
There was I can't remember if it was a CBS or a 60-minute segment done on credit default swaps, and in it, they were talking about how credit default swaps as contracts are often hidden from stockbrokers. Is that true as a practice? Not necessarily is it true in the way you conduct business and teach people to do business, but is it true in terms of the way credit default swaps got done for many years?
Well, I'm not actually, I don't know, Betsy, you might have more insight on that statement, but my sounds as if that statement, which has been made without fully using one element of the market,
right,
to make a slightly misleading statement, I think. So the thing about the derivatives marketplace is that there are two ways to trade derivatives. One is called exchange-traded. One is called over-the-counter. So exchange-traded derivatives simply means you trade them on an exchange. And so the notionals and, in many cases, the participants are pretty clear to the rest of the market. Whereas an over-the-counter derivative, frankly, Kim, you and I could trade a credit derivative right now over the phone. We wouldn't necessarily have to tell anybody about it. I want to buy protection on IBM. You want to sell protection on IBM. You know, you and I agree to do a credit default swap trade, 5 years, on a notional of, $10 million, and we're done. And then I send you a contract, you sign it, nobody has to know about it. That's an over-the-counter derivative.
Okay.
The reason that people are nervous about over-the-counter derivatives is because they're not transparent. Because exactly as I've just described, you and I could trade one today and execute it today. Execute meaning, officially confirm the transaction and sign a legal document that says we agree to do these things. I pay you a premium, and in the case that IBM goes bust, you me whole. That it's a private bilateral contract between two people.
Okay.
Yeah, and Kim, I'll just jump in here if you don't mind.
Please.
I don't necessarily know the 60 Minutes or what you're actually particularly referencing to, but as Terry described, the idea of OTC very much makes investors or pulls this sort of shadow over any derivative market. Just because Terry and you could hypothetically execute a trade over the phone doesn't mean any institution doesn't have to, under its particular regulations, do something with it and actually then be transparent. Like banks need to report their derivatives on their balance sheet and are regulated. Insurance companies have high regulation, especially here in the U.S. with the NAIC, and they have a certain way that they need to disclose of that, and so forth and so on. So again, while you two may be executing something, there will be requirements for what you actually need to do to disclose that information either to your investors in order for it to be clear or transparent what's happening out. Whether you guys are listed is probably not going to happen, but they need to actually disclose that information.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's a lot of concern over the opacity of the derivatives market because a huge percentage of derivatives gets traded, as Betsy said, OTC, over the counter, as opposed to via an exchange. And because of that, currently there's a lot of debate and potential regulation and potential legislation being discussed to make all derivatives trade on an exchange so that they're more transparent.
What do you think about that? You think it's going to make doing business harder?
I don't necessarily. My slightly concerned about that because I think that it is not necessarily addressing the underlying problem. That not risk is not necessarily whether everyone's able to know exactly what derivatives have been traded or not. The risk is more about the collateral that's put up, or the capital that's put up against those derivative trades, to ensure that banks, the risk is that banks are not necessarily, and various participants in the derivatives market are not necessarily adequately capitalized against the risks that they're taking on via derivatives. The fact that you may not be able to fully understand or fully see all the trades they've done, in my mind, is less of an issue. To be frank, banks who trade derivatives, they deal in hundreds of derivatives a day, hundreds, maybe thousands of derivatives a day. So being able to see all of those is simply a stream of data that ultimately I don't think is very useful. The real kicker for me is adequate capitalization.
And how does one do the due diligence in your field to make sure there's adequate capitalization to be issuing a credit default swap contract?
Well, the banks have any risk, any financial product that is traded has some agreed standard of netting and reporting and agreed capital against it.
Okay.
And what has happened in the past, that a lot of the credit derivatives people were trading were very complex, and the capital that was required to be against them was not an agreed standard of capital to put against those incredibly complex structured credit products. And a great example is AIG, for example. The products that they had taken on board were incredibly complex, and there was no standardized capital requirement for them. And as a result, AIG could make the decision about how much capital they wanted to put themselves. And as it turned out, they didn't have enough capital, and things got a little bit hairy.
Those agencies, organizations that are the issuing or the suppliers of credit default swaps, like Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch, etc., are they the only ones that can issue them? Are there only certain groups that can issue them? And what is it that allows an organization or an investment bank to issue them? What do you have to do to be able to issue them?
Well, I wouldn't say, again, like I said, you and I could trade one today. So there's no restriction on who can trade a credit default swap. I think a better way, it's a strange use of the term. I wouldn't say that banks issue credit default swaps. I would say that banks trade credit default swaps.
Okay, I got it. So it doesn't really matter. I just want to bring the point home again. In other words, we could do it. It doesn't have to be just an investment bank. It's open to everybody?
It doesn't have to be an investment bank.
Right.
I think the issue is that the banks themselves, what I think a better way to term them are they are dealers. They will deal in credit default swaps. They've set up individuals who are prepared to make prices to either protection or protection. So a bank decides that they want to be a dealer in credit default swaps. They want to make a market in credit default swaps for their, on the whole, institutional investors. And the reason an institutional investor would want to deal their credit default swaps with a dealer, as opposed to, say, just you and I, is because of their, what we would say, quote unquote, the credit worthiness dealer versus you or I. So an institution is looking to buy protection on $100 million of IBM. They want to buy protection from someone that they know could actually pay them out $100 million.
Got it.
IBM actually went bust. So they're certainly not going to come to you or I. They're going to go to, I think there are maybe about 20 different dealers of credit default swaps in the U.S. and they'll choose who they go to based on whether they get the best price or whether